nation and brings us closer to true safety, true fairness, and true justice.
Every women in the state today signing an egregious law enforcement bill.
This is a great start in helping to reverse the negative effects of mass incarceration in America.
I'm sorry, but there's some instances where we need to keep somebody in jail because they're a very, very bad person, and gun crimes is one of those.
Some may forget that the systemic racism and discrimination that we fight against on a daily basis is not simply because we've heard about it from our constituents or other third-party sources. It is because we and our loved ones have experienced it, lived it, been traumatized by it, excluded by it.
How does somebody that's never worked one day in the street understand what law enforcement officers do?
It's terrible timing, and it's unfortunate that the people, these representatives and the legislatures that pass these bills, they're not out here on the streets. They don't know what's going on.
But in the wake of George Floyd's murder, something else happened altogether. Those 8 minutes and 46 seconds caused a national awakening, shining the brightest of spotlights on the invisible sin of systemic racism that is embedded in our systems of government and in our laws.
The horrible crimes committed in Minneapolis, Chicago, and across the nation caused by bad actors in law enforcement must come to an end. It's not tolerated. And as a Republican, I believe no person should have to live in fear of their government. And we must address those issues to make sure that that is true. House Bill 3653 doesn't do it. In short, it is a confusing, inoperable, and contradictory attempt to reform policing and the criminal justice system.
Systemic racism has caused Black people to have disproportionate contact with policing, jails, and prisons rather than with entrepreneurship, post-secondary education, and economic opportunities.
It's very sad. If at a time where we need people to be tough, we need the adjudication process to be tough on the gun crimes and the shootings. We need support from our legislatures and not legislators pointing their fingers and saying the police are bad, because I think regular everyday people know that the police aren't bad.
You're going to lose law enforcement officers. We have a lot.
That's not exaggerated?
No, that is not exaggerated.
The facts are the facts. We do have two Americas and we have two justice systems, and we have to make them one. Our goal in this fight is to rid the state of Illinois of systemic racism. My colleagues and I have put in our time. This legislative victory is a step toward reimagining the criminal justice system altogether.
People in Illinois have been divided. We've been used, we've been mocked, we've been marginalized. People in Illinois have been ignored based on their race.
Opponents of this law don't want any change, don't believe there is injustice in the system, and are preying upon fear of change to lie and fearmonger in defense of the status quo.
You're saying that Republicans are defending systemic racism.
I think change is hard for many of them, and many of them may not live in communities where they really understand what that means. So I don't put any ill will on that. I just think that we need change in the state.
This is a massive victory for the Black community, but it's truly a victory for all communities and all marginalized people, and it will reverberate for decades. The Champaign Bail Coalition that is represented here today, they only came about because we had so many citizens going to our county jail who could not afford to bail out of small amounts. And out of that necessity, the Bail Coalition was born here in Champaign-Urbana.
The elimination of cash bail basically says that we respect the honor system for violent criminals and gang members. Yes, the honor system.
The one person that hates a bad police officer most is police officers. What we
Wrong.
want to see and what we still hope we see.
Why don't they speak out for him?
We are.
Because it's the thin blue line. They don't.
And that is a great question, actually. As
And they
police
won't.
officers, we don't feel like it's been our place to speak out. We feel like we better not say anything. We're here we'll be judged. We'll be looked at. We have quit. That has now ended. We will speak out.
We're in the midst of 3 crises.
That's a lie.
We all know these crises. Public health crisis, an economic crisis, and a crisis with systemic racism, particularly in law enforcement.
But the crisis of 16, not just COVID-19, but the crisis of 1619. Where that white lion, that boat, that ship, that brought that scourge to the shores of this country, the white lion, plague that continues to plague this country. What I would say to opponents, and I would say to everyone who is listening to this, to listen to our speech, be able to distinguish and separate systemic racism from you being racist. We are not calling you racist by challenging systemic racism. They are two very different things. Acknowledge that systemic racism means that advantages have been built into systems that hold other people's back, that other people back and lift other people up. That is what we are challenging by challenging systemic racism.
The police reform bill is the final measure former House Speaker Michael Madigan sent to the governor's